Hi, Susan Leahy here from RobertsRulesMadeSimple.com, coming to you with another episode of Robert's Rules Revealed. Today, we're going to talk to bylaws and constitution expert Chris Jachimowicz from ASGA, the American Student Government Association. He'll be shedding some light on some big bylaws and constitution questions. Be sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single episode of Robert's Rules Revealed. All right, so we're on with Chris Jachimowicz today. Chris, I'm so excited you're here to talk to us about the biggest bylaw mistakes that you've seen people making. So welcome to Robert's Rules Revealed. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in. Bylaws are a huge issue among many of my clients, and I wanted to kind of shed some light on some of the biggest mistakes that are made when it comes to bylaws. So let's just jump right in. Chris, why don't you share with us some of the mistakes that you see?
Okay, well, I'll try to go from some of the largest to the smallest. And I think what we need to keep in mind is that you want a document that, while no one likes reading bylaws,
right,
it ought to be readable and understandable by even just the average layperson.
Wow.
So that's kind of what I'm looking for as I go through and do this type of work. And probably the one mistake I see most often is that people set their bylaws up by function rather than constituency.
Okay, so by function, rather than constituency. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. What I'll usually see is that they'll have articles that will say officers, executive board, then it'll say elections, and then it'll say remuneration, and then duties of officers, and so they keep looking at functional aspects instead of saying, okay, let's look at officers. Let's put everything about officers into this section.
Right.
So that under that section, they would have how the person is nominated, how they're elected, what their duties are, and all of that would be in one area.
Right. And which really makes the document more readable, like you were just saying.
Well, it allows someone who's reading to know that everything about that particular constituency is right there.
Right.
Now, that may mean that you need to be redundant in some cases. So you might have officers, you might then have also election of members, but they're going to appear in different sections. And so people know immediately when they look at it, when you say elections, whose elections you're talking about.
Exactly.
It just makes it much clearer to have it set up by constituency.
Well, that's a really great tip, and I love what you said when you just jumped us off. It should be readable by anybody, not just somebody who feels like they know how to interpret bylaws. Right.
And you want to try to avoid that interpretation piece.
Right.
A second piece that again can really reduce the size of the document is to not repeat what's in your parliamentary authority. So not repeat what's in Robert's Rules of Order.
Yes, so important. That's why Roberts exists. You don't need to write everything that's in Roberts down in your bylaws. And do you see a lot of people doing that?
I see it from time to time, and sometimes extensively, so that they're writing down passages almost verbatim from Roberts. And the problem you run into there is if that passage in your bylaws gets modified at some other point, the question will come up: well, did you intend for it to differ from your parliamentary authority, or was it just a slip in doing that? If you keep Robert's rules in Robert's Rules of Order, then you don't have to worry about making errant changes.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice. What are some of the other large mistakes that you see?
The final big one I would give you is actually indexing. And by that I mean actually creating an outline and using bold headers and indentation and consistent alphabet, consistent numbering, so that literally every line in your document or every paragraph in your document is indexed in some way.
Right. And what's so interesting, everything that you're saying to me, it really is kind of reinforcing that point. It has to be readable. And sometimes the indexing gets so confusing that you don't know what you're reading. Right.
You should be able to look at every paragraph and give it a brief title. Because every paragraph should be a separate thought or idea about the structure of the organization.
So how does an organization, I know I'm kind of going off a little bit here, but how does an organization know when they need to hire a consultant like you?
If they've gotten to the point where their institutional organizational memory doesn't know why some things were even put into the document, that's usually a good time to call a consultant and ask them to work with you, because they can they can work through whether it's realistic or even makes sense to keep it. Sometimes you have an investment in it where you don't want to change things because you're not sure what you're changing. And a consultant from outside doesn't have that same concern. They can look at it practically based on how well that organization, how well that document can work for your organization.
Yeah, and I really think that's a really great piece of advice. It's that sense of when you're guessing about why things are in your bylaws and when they were put in, it really might be a great idea to bring someone else who has a fresh pair of eyes to come in and look at how to support you in really writing bylaws that are readable and understandable. So we have time for a couple of other mistakes. If you want to share those real quickly.
Sure. Some small ones that I see. Oftentimes, the bylaws will say the chairperson can only vote in the case of a tie.
Yeah.
And actually, under Roberts, the chair can vote any time their vote would affect the outcome. So a tie is one case. So it's 8-8. And the chair can vote in favor and break that tie and therefore have the motion approved. But the chair could also vote if the original vote was 9-8, they could vote on the side against the motion and bring it to a tie and cause that motion to fail.
Right.
So when you write in just the case of a tie, you're actually restricting the very limited abilities that the chair already has to just one side of an argument, which really isn't fair.
Right, and so I think that's interesting to think about. So again, is that written in Roberts? Do they even need to put that into their bylaws?
No, they don't. It's already written in Roberts. I mean, so they don't need. It goes back to the previous comment about repeating Roberts.
Right.
You don't need to put that in unless you're really being intentional and don't want the chair to vote for some reason in other cases.
Very important. Well, I have to tell you, these mistakes, I'm sure we see them all over the bylaws, and having a really sound set of bylaws is so important to the success of any organization. I mean, the bylaws really are the foundation of the business that organization is going to be able to accomplish. And so I appreciate you spending some time with us sharing some of the biggest bylaw mistakes. So thank you so much, Chris.